What happens when the first face you see in an emergency is the last face you ever want to see? What if the vehicle that arrives to save you is the one that takes you somewhere far, far worse? The world of first responders is built on a foundation of sacred trust. We call, and they come. They are the calm in our chaos, the steady hands in our most vulnerable moments. But in the quiet, forgotten corners of the map, where the streetlights are few and the woods are deep, that trust has been violated in ways that defy understanding. This is verified nightmare, where every story is documented, every detail is sourced, and every nightmare is real. Tonight, we present 11 meticulously verified accounts from the darkest edges of emergency services. These are not urban legends. These are cases pulled from internal investigations, court transcripts, and eyewitness testimonies that paint a chilling portrait of betrayal. We will examine instances where the very system designed to preserve life became an instrument of profound horror. According to declassified disciplinary reports and victim statements, the stories you are about to hear share common, terrifying threads. The inexplicable detour, the ambulance that arrives too quickly, knowing details never relayed to dispatch. The paramedic whose medical knowledge seems to serve a purpose for more sinister than healing. Hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because what you are about to hear will change the way you hear a siren in the night. It may even make you think twice before you ever dial for help. Our first case file comes from the fog-shrouded valleys of Western Oregon. This is the account of a hiker who learned that sometimes rescue is just the beginning of the ordeal. This is the 13th mile. The 13th mile. Evan Schaefer was a 34-year-old data analyst from Portland, an experienced day hiker who logged every trail on a detailed topographic map. His escape was the dense, green wilderness of the Cascade Foothills, a place he trusted for its predictable solitude. On the morning of October 17th, he set out on the well-marked Hemlock Ridge Loop, a challenging but manageable 8-mile trek. The weather was crisp, the sky a clear blue. He signed the trail register at 9:14 a.m., a fact later confirmed by Forest Service records. His plan was to be back at his car by p.m. The incident was mundane. At roughly the halfway point, according to the GPS data later recovered from his phone, Evan stepped on a loose rock hidden under a blanket of damp leaves. His ankle twisted violently. The sound, he would later state in his official testimony, was a sickening pop. He was not lost. He was immobile. After an hour of trying to bear weight, he accepted his situation. His cell phone had no signal, a common occurrence in that steep gully. But he was prepared. He carried a personal locator beacon, a bright yellow satellite device he had never before needed. At 11:47 a.m., he activated it, sending a distress signal with his coordinates to the local county search and rescue. The response was, by all accounts, abnormally swift. The standard protocol for a non-life-threatening injury in that terrain was a ground team on foot, a process that could take hours. Instead, Evan heard the distant thump of rotor blades in just under 40 minutes. A sleek, dark blue helicopter marked with a simple red cross descended into a small clearing near his position. It was not a state police bird or the familiar orange of the National Guard. Two paramedics jumped out. They moved with efficient, practiced calm. They introduced themselves as Leo and Grant from a private air medical service called Aegis Response, contracted by the county. Evan, in pain and relief, thought little of it. Private contracts were plausible. They assessed his ankle, confirmed it was a severe sprain, possibly fractured. They immobilized it with a pneumatic splint. Their equipment was top tier, their demeanor professional, but notably silent. They asked no personal questions. They didn't chat. They simply loaded him onto a stretcher and into the modified helicopter. Evan recalled the interior was unusually dark, the windows tinted to near opacity. He was given an intravenous line for fluids and pain management. One of the men, Leo, the one with the clean-shaven head and a small tattoo of a caduceus behind his ear, told him to rest. The medication, he said, would help with the pain of the flight. Evan felt the cool rush in his arm, and the world quickly softened into a dreamless sleep. He awoke to the sensation of the helicopter landing. But the sound was wrong. The rotor echoes suggested a confined space, a hangar or a large building, not the open pad of a hospital. The engine cut. The doors opened. The lighting was a dim, industrial yellow. He was not at a hospital. He was in what appeared to be a private aircraft hangar, concrete floored, and mostly empty. A single fluorescent strip light flickered overhead. His ankle throbbed. Leo and Grant unstrapped his gurney and wheeled him out, their boots echoing. Evan, groggy, began to protest. "Where is this? This isn't a hospital." Grant, a taller man with wire-frame glasses, looked down at him with a flat, emotionless expression. "Specialist facility for orthopedic assessment. County protocol for complex injuries in remote areas." The explanation felt rehearsed. The hallway they entered was long, lined with closed, unmarked doors. The air smelled of antiseptic and old dust. At the end of the hall, they stopped at a door marked 04. Inside was a small, windowless room containing a basic medical cot, a sink, and a monitoring machine that was unplugged. There was no call button, no phone. "Wait here," Leo said. "The specialist will be in shortly." They transferred him to the cot, checked his fur line, and left without another word. The door closed. Evan heard the distinct, heavy sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. A cold dread, sharper than any pain in his ankle, flooded his system. He was a prisoner. He spent the next several hours in a state of escalating terror, yelling until he was hoarse, pounding on the door. No one came. The only break in the silence was the occasional, muffled sound of a door closing somewhere else in the building. The reveal came close to midnight. Parched and exhausted, Evan noticed something in the sink. He hobbled over. A previous occupant had scratched a message into the stained porcelain with what must have been a ring or a tool. It read, "They aren't paramedics. They collect. Don't let them take your blood." At that moment, the door unlocked. Leo entered, alone, holding a large phlebotomy kit and several empty, unlabeled blood bags. His clinical demeanor was gone. His eyes held a detached, acquisitive curiosity. "You're a rare type, Mr. Schaefer," he said calmly, preparing a needle. "Oh, negative. Universal donor. A very valuable commodity to certain private collectors. The aftermath and verification stem from a miraculous, chaotic escape." As Leo advanced, Evan used his uninjured leg to kick over a rolling medical stand, creating a distraction. He lunged, grabbing a heavy fur pole as a makeshift weapon. A desperate struggle ensued, documented later by the bruising and lacerations on both men. Evan managed to strike Leo in the temple, stunning him, and fled the room into the dark hallway. He found an emergency exit at the far end, its alarm wires cut. He burst out into a remote, wooded industrial park at a.m., still in his hospital gown, his ankles screaming. He flagged down a passing truck driver on a deserted service road. Sheriff's deputies, acting on his frantic report, located the hangar by dawn. It was empty. Forensic teams confirmed the presence of Evan's blood on the cot and in the sink, corroborating his story. They also found traces of at least 6 other unique DNA profiles in the drain of that sink. The company Aegis Response existed only as a sophisticated shell, with fake licensing and a vanished paper trail. The helicopter's registration number was cloned from a decommissioned aircraft in Arizona. The official case file remains open, classified as kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. The most chilling, unresolved detail is buried in the evidence log. In the room marked 04, investigators found a small, discarded label from a blood bag. It wasn't from a standard medical supplier. The label bore the logo of a defunct, controversial biotech firm called Vita Cross, which had its facilities shut down years prior for illegal organ trafficking and untested longevity blood product experiments. Evan Schaefer receives no follow-up from the sheriff's department, but every year, on the anniversary of his rescue, a single, empty blood bag arrives at his former Portland address, postmarked from a different small town each time. The Echo in Dispatch. Maya Flores was a 22-year-old emergency medical dispatcher for the rural county of Groveton, a job she took after caring for her ailing grandmother. She was the calm voice in the dark, trained to be the first line of logic in a world of panic. Her workstation, Carol 3, was her domain, 3 monitors, a headset, and a detailed map of the county's sprawling backroads. Life in Groveton was quiet, the calls typically routine: chest pains, farm accidents, the occasional car wreck on the county highway. That changed on the night of November 8th. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. The caller ID showed a location marker for the Old Mill Road Bridge, a crumbling structure over the Blackwater Creek, mostly used by teenagers. The voice on the line was a young man, breathless, sobbing. "You have to send someone. My friend, he's hurt. He fell. There's so much blood." Maya, protocol-driven, began her script. "I'm sending help now. What's your name? Can you tell me exactly where you are on the bridge?" The sobbing hitched. "It's the middle. He's not moving. Please, hurry." Then a new sound. In the background, clear as day, came the warble of an ambulance siren. It was distant, but approaching fast. Then the line went dead. Maya immediately dispatched the nearest unit, ambulance to 107, crewed by veterans she knew well, Roy and Jess. They were 4 minutes out. She tried to call back. No answer. 30 seconds after the dispatch, her personal radio, the one used for direct unit to dispatch communication, crackled. It was Roy from 207. "Dispatch, we're en route to Mill Bridge, but we're picking up another call on the county ban. Single vehicle rollover on Route 9 near the quarry. Sounds bad. Can you confirm priority?" Maya froze. Route 9 was in the opposite direction. There was no other call. She checked all active lines. Nothing. 207. "Disregard," she said, her voice tight. "You are the only unit dispatched. Proceed to Mill Bridge. Confirm you are not receiving any other traffic." There was a pause, filled with static. "Negative, dispatch. The call on Route 9 is clear." Female caller, screaming. "We have to triage." Proceeding to Route 9, and they signed off. Maya felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She tried to hail them again. Silence. She dispatched the next closest unit, a sheriff's deputy, to the bridge. At 2:26 a.m., the deputy arrived. His report, logged in the county system, was terse. No persons found at Mill Bridge location. No signs of accident, struggle, or blood. Area clear. The buildup was a slow unraveling of reality. The next night, another call. A woman, whispering from the abandoned gravel pits. "He's in the white van. The medic has him. Please." Again. The distant siren in the background before the call dropped. Maya dispatched a unit. Again, the unit reported receiving a contradictory, more urgent call on a frequency they shouldn't have been monitoring, pulling them away. They would find nothing at the original location. It happened a third time. A pattern was emerging. The calls were lures, and someone was hijacking her ambulances with phantom emergencies. Maya began her own investigation, cross-referencing the times and locations of the fake calls with other data. She pulled the GPS logs for the ambulance units, a move that required supervisor approval, which she obtained by citing a suspected radio malfunction. The logs told a horrifying story. Each time a unit was diverted, its GPS showed it driving not to the fake alternative location, but to a dead zone, a 2-mile stretch of heavily forested county road where signal was notoriously poor. The ambulances would stop there for exactly 23 minutes before resuming normal patrol. The vehicle diagnostics, accessed from the fleet system, showed something else. During those 23 minutes, the rear patient compartment doors were opened and closed. The reveal came from a piece of evidence no one else had thought to check. The archived audio from the ambulance dash cams, which recorded externally. For the night of the Mill Bridge call, the video for ambulance to 107 was corrupted, as if by interference, but the audio was partially recoverable. Maya, working late, cleaned up the file. She heard Roy and Jess discussing the Route 9 call. Then, the sound of their ambulance stopping. The crunch of gravel. The click of the rear doors unlocking. Then, a new voice, calm, male, familiar. It was the voice of David Kiernan, a beloved, recently retired paramedic supervisor who had trained half the county. His voice was warm, authoritative. "Boys, thanks for meeting me. This one's off the books. Transfer from a private facility. Got a sedated psych patient for transport to Ridgewood." Just need you to sign this waiver. Maya listened, numb. Kiernan was not on duty. He was retired. There was no private facility. The audio continued with the sounds of a stretcher being loaded, a body being strapped in. Then Kiernan's voice again, now colder. Remember, this never happened. Your pension reviews are next month, aren't they? The implication was a velvet-wrapped threat. The ambulance doors closed. The file ended. The aftermath and verification involved Maya taking her evidence to the state police, bypassing the compromised county sheriff. A joint task force was formed. Undercover officers staged a fake emergency in the GPS dead zone. When ambulance 203 was diverted, they moved in. They found David Kiernan and 2 active duty paramedics in the process of loading a drugged, homeless man from the county bus station into the ambulance. Kiernan's home was searched. Declassified court documents show they found files on dozens of missing persons transients, hitchhikers, people unlikely to be reported, along with forged medical transfer paperwork, and over $300,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency. Kiernan, it turned out, was running a human trafficking pipeline, using his insider knowledge and the trusted county ambulance service as a perfect cover to snatch people off the streets with 0 witnesses. The official record states Kiernan and his accomplices were convicted on 47 counts of kidnapping and conspiracy, but the case file has a redacted appendix. The state investigator's closing note, obtained through a source, reads, "Victim count likely higher." Audio analysis suggests Kiernan E's voice was used in synthesized form on county radio bands to divert units on at least 11 other occasions over an 18-month period. Technology source unknown. Not all diverted units have been identified. Maya Flores no longer works as a dispatcher. She moved to a city hundreds of miles away, but she has told investigators that sometimes, very late at night, her personal cell phone will ring once. When she answers, there is only the sound of a distant siren and a calm, familiar male voice whispering a single word before the line goes dead. Echo. The night shift at Mercy Memorial. Daniel "Danny" O'Connell was a 28-year-old EMT, newly certified and burning with the idealistic drive to make a difference. He transferred to the night shift at Mercy Memorial Hospital in the isolated town of Fallows End precisely because it was quiet, a place to learn without the relentless chaos of a city service. The hospital itself was a relic, a 4-story brick building with long, echoing linoleum halls built in the 1950s. His partner was a grizzled veteran named Walter, a man of few words who seemed to know every backroad and every resident by name. Their ambulance, Medic 4, was an older model, its cabin perpetually smelling of stale coffee and antiseptic. The first shift was unremarkable. The second, routine. The third shift, a Tuesday, presented the inciting incident. At 3:18 a.m., a call came in for an unknown medical at 1417 Briarwood Lane. Dispatch provided no details, which was unusual but not unprecedented. Walter drove, his face impassive in the dashboard glow. The house was a small, dark ranch at the end of a cul-de-sac. No lights were on. The front door was unlocked. They entered, calling out. The living room was tidy, empty. In the back bedroom, they found an elderly man, Mr. Hennessy, according to the mail, on the table, sitting up in bed, awake and alert. He claimed he hadn't called. He felt fine. He was just reading. Apologetic, they cleared the call. As they were leaving, Danny's flashlight beam caught something on the scratched hardwood floor of the hallway. It was a single, fresh drop of blood. Not smeared, as from a footstep, but a perfect, glistening dome. He pointed it out to Walter. Walter shone his own light, grunted. Probably a shaving cut from earlier. Old houses settle. Make stuff appear. He clapped Danny on the shoulder. Don't go looking for ghosts, kid. This town'll give them to you. The build-up was a series of these inexplicable calls, always between a M and a M. The dead zone of the night. A chest pain at the closed library. A female down at the empty playground. Each time, they would arrive to find no patient, no signs of distress, but always a subtle, wrong detail. A back door left swinging on its hinges at the library. The merry-go-round at the playground spinning slowly, as if just released, and always a single drop of fresh blood somewhere on the scene. Danny began to log them secretly in a notepad. Time, location, the detail. Walter dismissed everyone. Faulty dispatch. Kids playing pranks. You're too green. You're seeing patterns in the static. Danny's paranoia grew. He started checking the ambulance after each call. On the fourth such call, a possible stroke at an abandoned gas station, he found something new. In the rear compartment, strapped to the storage rack beside the oxygen tank, was a small, black digital voice recorder. It wasn't hospital issue. He played it back in the cab, headphones on, while Walter was doing paperwork. The recording was of their entire previous shift, the radio traffic, their casual conversation, the sounds of the calls. It was pristine, professional quality. But in the background, underneath their voices, Danny could make out a faint, rhythmic sound, a slow, steady drip, and a soft, wet, chewing noise. He didn't confront Walter. Instead, he began to investigate Walter. He looked up his partner's employment history. Walter had been at Mercy Memorial for 22 years. He was a widower, lived alone, well respected. But a deep search of local newspaper archives revealed a single, buried article from 15 years prior. A hiker had gone missing in the state forest bordering Fallows End. The last person to see him was a local medical responder who reported finding the man disoriented, but refusing help near a trailhead. The hiker was never found. The responder's name was not printed, citing privacy policies. The reveal happened on a rainy Thursday. Another call, this one for a traumatic injury at the old water treatment plant on the edge of town. Walter took the call with his usual gruff, calm, but Danny saw his knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. This time, when they arrived, the chain link gate was open. A single, dim bulb shone over a side door. Walter turned to him, his face suddenly ancient and grim in the dashboard lights. Wait here. This one's complicated. I'll signal if I need the stretcher. He got out and walked into the building alone, his flashlight beam swallowed by the darkness. Danny waited for 5 minutes, then 10. Radio silence. A cold certainty settled over him. He grabbed his own flashlight and the heavy-duty trauma shears, and stepped out into the rain. He followed Walter's footprints through the mud to the side door. Inside, the plant was a cathedral of rust and dripping water. He moved silently, his light cutting through the gloom. He heard voices from a lower level. One was Walter's, low and pleading. The other was a wet, guttural rasp, creeping to a rusted catwalk. Danny looked down into a large filtration chamber. Walter stood there, his medical bag open. On the ground before him was a figure. It was vaguely human-shaped, but grotesquely distended, its skin a pallid, moist gray. It was hunched over something, a deer carcass. Danny realized with a wave of nausea. This thing were the tattered, stained remnants of a Mercy Memorial paramedic's uniform. Walter was speaking to it. Not tonight, Sam. Not this one. He's a good kid. I brought you the other stuff, see? From the blood bank. Walter held out several bags of expired blood. The thing Sam looked up. Its eyes were milky white, its mouth too wide. It let out a hungry hiss. Sam was Samuel Brewer. According to the personnel file Danny later accessed, Brewer was Walter's original partner, lost when their ambulance crashed into Blackwater Creek during a storm 24 years ago. His body was never recovered. The official report declared him deceased. But Walter knew the truth. The thing in the water had changed Sam, given him a relentless, parasitic hunger. And for over 2 decades, Walter had been covering for him, using his paramedic knowledge to keep him sedated with stolen pharmaceuticals and fed with stolen blood, luring him with fake calls to contained locations to deliver his meals. The prank calls were Walter's system. The blood drops were Sam's signature. The aftermath and verification stems from Danny's frantic call to the state police from the catwalk, his transmission punctuated by Sam's shriek of discovery. A SWAT team found the water treatment plant empty, but forensic evidence was overwhelming. Walter's fingerprints, the expired blood bags with hospital inventory numbers, and decades of biological matter in the filtration chamber that matched a DNA profile on file for Samuel Brewer. Walter was arrested without resistance. He confessed to obstruction of justice, desecration of a corpse, and multiple counts of theft, but he never admitted Sam was alive. He claimed he was tending to a mental delusion stemming from guilt. The official case is closed, with Walter in a psychiatric ward, but the declassified evidence inventory lists one anomalous item recovered from Walter's home: a current year ambulance dispatch logbook, handwritten in Walter's script, detailing calls and feedings for the past 6 months. The last entry, dated the night after Walter's arrest, is not in his handwriting. It reads, in a shaky, water-stained scrawl, "Hungry. New driver comes soon." And once a month, the security cameras at the now-shuttered Mercy Memorial Ambulance Bay activate for exactly 60 seconds at a m, showing the bay doors slowly opening and then closing, as if something is waiting for a ride that never arrives. The Static Protocol. Arjun Mehta was a 39-year-old communications engineer who volunteered as the sole technical manager for the volunteer fire and EMS station in the remote, lake-dotted town of Clearwater. His world was one of cables, frequencies, and clean signal paths. He took immense pride in maintaining the complex radio repeater system that connected the townie's handful of emergency vehicles to the county dispatch 40 miles away. The system was his creation, a patchwork of clever fixes and vintage equipment that worked flawlessly until it didn't. The inciting incident was a burst of static. During a routine Wednesday afternoon equipment check, Arjun heard it on the main channel, a 3-second burst of white noise that carried a faint, almost musical pattern underneath, like a discordant digital chime. It was gone before he could log it. He wrote it off as atmospheric. But the next day, it happened again during an actual call, a minor fender bender on Main Street. The responding unit, Ambulance 2, reported the static blocked their reception for a critical moment as they were receiving intersection instructions. Again, the strange sub-harmonic chime. Arjun began a diagnostic sweep. All equipment tested within normal parameters. The anomaly, according to his spectrum analyzer, was not external interference. It was originating from within the closed system, as if the repeater itself was generating the noise. The buildup was technical and terrifying. The static bursts became more frequent, always on the EMS primary channel, never on fire or police bands. They began to last longer, 5 seconds, then 10. Paramedics reported that during these bursts, their mobile data terminals would flicker, and sometimes, their GPS would place them incorrectly on the map, showing them a block off from their true location. Arjun, obsessed, set up a continuous audio recorder on the channel. He isolated the anomalous sound. When he cleaned it up and slowed it down, the chime resolved into a very low bitrate, synthesized voice. It was saying a single word: comply. He took his findings to the volunteer chief, who shrugged. Old gear, Arjun. Spooks itself. Budget for the new repeater isn't until next fiscal year. But then, the first protocol call came in. It was a Friday night. A call for a cardiac arrest at 788 Lakeshore Drive. The address was for a summer cabin, closed for the season. Ambulance 2 responded. The static burst hit as they were a minute out. When it cleared, dispatch tried to hail them for an update. No response. The ambulance arrived at the dark, locked cabin, found nothing, and reported back, confused. The crew said they had never stopped communicating. They heard no static. They received no instruction to disregard. But Arjun's recorder told a different story. In the clear patch of audio immediately after the static, a calm, artificial voice different from the synthesized comply had spoken directly onto the channel, overriding dispatch. It said, Protocol 6 initiated. Proceed to secondary coordinates. Patient is secure. Those coordinates, when plotted, led to a boat launch 3 miles away. Nothing was found at the boat launch either, but the next morning, an elderly seasonal resident was reported missing by his family. He had been in poor health. His last known location was his cabin at 788 Lakeshore Drive. Arjun dove into the technical abyss. He physically traced every cable in the repeater shack, which was housed in the damp basement of the station. He found nothing out of place. In desperation, he reviewed decades of physical maintenance logs, stored in mildewing boxes. In a log from 15 years prior, he found a curious entry. A technician from a now-defunct private defense contractor, Cygnus Systems, had performed a systems upgrade and firmware installation on the Townies repeater as part of a county-wide emergency communications resilience grant. The technician's name was redacted with heavy black marker. The word protocol was handwritten in the margin. The reveal came when Arjun decided to bypass the main repeater entirely, creating a direct, short-range radio link between the ambulances and a base unit in his home. During his next scheduled overnight monitor shift, he watched the spectrum display from his living room. At 3:03 a.m., the static bloomed on the main channel. At the same instant, his homemade system detected a powerful, bidirectional data burst, a microwave transmission aimed not from the town, but from the direction of the large, forested state preserve north of the lake. The burst contained an encrypted packet. Arjun couldn't decrypt it, but he could trace its vector. The source was moving, slowly, deliberately, along the old logging roads in the preserve. He called the sheriff, his voice shaking with the engineer's rage. "There is a mobile, sophisticated transmitter impersonating our repeater. It's hijacking our ambulances. It's in the state preserve right now." A deputy, skeptical but obliged to check, drove to the area. What he found, according to the supplemental report, was an abandoned, late-model ambulance, painted plain white, with no markings. Its interior had been gutted and converted into a mobile server, rack and broadcasting station, powered by a silent, diesel generator. It was empty. No fingerprints. No paperwork. The equipment was professional, military-grade, and sterile. The only identifying mark was a small engraved plate on the main transmitter, Cygnus Systems Prototype Project Echoing Heart Protocol Series. The aftermath and verification is a maze of official silence and haunting implications. The state police and FBI took over. The white ambulance was towed to an undisclosed facility. The official statement to the town council, as recorded in closed session minutes, was that a prankster with advanced knowledge had been tampering with emergency services. The case was closed. But Arjun received a visit from two men in plain clothes who showed him federal badges. They questioned him for 4 hours, then presented him with a non-disclosure agreement. He signed. The missing elderly man was found a week later, wandering on a road 20 miles away. He was dehydrated and confused. He claimed nice men in uniforms had taken him to a clean, bright place, run tests on him, and let him go. He could describe nothing else. The declassified portion of the FBI's evidence inventory, obtained through a FOIA request by a journalist, lists the items found in the ambulance. Along with the broadcasting equipment, agents found medical supplies, a small pharmacy of experimental drugs, and a file containing the names, addresses, and medical histories of 17 Clearwater residents, all over the age of 65, all with significant pre-existing conditions. The final, unresolved detail is in the ongoing technical logs. Every year, on the anniversary of the Protocol 6 call, at exactly 3:03 a.m., the Clearwater repeater, even after its full replacement, receives a 1-second data burst on a deprecated frequency. It contains no voice, no coordinates, just a single, repeating line of code that translates to a medical term. Vital signs. Nominal. The last run of Medic 7. Lena Petrov was a 45-year-old paramedic and single mother who prized routine above all else. In the small, mountain-locked town of Silverwood, her life was a meticulously orchestrated dance between school runs, her shifts at the Silverwood Volunteer Ambulance Corps, and caring for her asthmatic 10-year-old son, Milo. Her ambulance, the aging but reliable Medic 7, was like a second home. The horror began not with a call, but with a replacement. Her usual partner, Ben, took a sudden leave of absence. His temporary substitute was a man named Silas. Silas was new to town, quiet, with perfectly competent skills, but an unnerving stillness. He had cold, pale blue eyes that never seemed to blink enough, and he spoke in a measured, soft tone that felt less like calm and more like a lack of human inflection. He knew protocols flawlessly, but he never made small talk. He just watched. Especially, Lena noted, he watched her during pediatric calls. The inciting incident was a simple transport. They took an elderly woman with a broken hip from her home to the regional hospital 60 miles down the mountain, a routine 2-hour round trip. Lena drove. On the way back, in the absolute darkness of the mountain pass, Silas, riding in the passenger seat, broke his silence. "Your son, Milo. His breathing is worse at night, isn't it? The mountain air is thin here." Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She had never mentioned Milo's asthma to him, never spoken of him at all. "How do you know about my son?" she asked, her voice tight. Silas didn't turn his head. He stared ahead at the winding road lit by their headlights. "I make it a point to know my partners. It ensures efficiency." He said nothing more for the rest of the trip. The buildup was a silent invasion of her private life. 2 days later, she found a single, unfamiliar asthma inhaler of a brand not covered by their insurance in Milo's backpack. When confronted, Milo said a nice paramedic man had given it to him at the park, saying it was a new sample. Lena confiscated it, her hands trembling. The following week, their home phone, a landline she kept for emergencies, would ring late at night. When answered, there would be only the sound of slow, deliberate breathing, then a click. She changed the number. The calls began on her cell phone, always from blocked numbers. Then, the patterns of her shifts began to change. Dispatch logs, which she requested, showed that calls were being subtly rerouted. Calls near her son's school or his soccer practice were always, inexplicably, assigned to Medic 7 when she was on duty with Silas. It was as if someone was engineering opportunities for observation. Lena's investigation turned to Silas himself. A call to the licensing board confirmed his credentials were valid, but they were new, issued only 8 months prior. His previous employment history was listed as private contract work with a company that had no phone number or address. Digging deeper into town records, she found a connection that froze her blood. The small house Silas was renting was previously owned by a family named Gable. Their 7-year-old daughter, Emily, had died 5 years ago from a severe asthma attack. The tragedy was that an ambulance had been dispatched, but it had suffered a rare, catastrophic mechanical failure, a seized engine 2 miles from their home. It was the old Medic 3. The report cited a maintenance oversight. The mechanic who signed off on that ambulance's last service. His name was Silas Gable, Emily's uncle. The reveal was not a single moment, but a dreadful, converging certainty. Silas wasn't just watching. He was studying. He was comparing. He believed the system had failed his niece due to human error, a mechanics, a paramedics. And now, he was inside the system, testing it, testing her, with her son as the unwitting subject. He was recreating the conditions of his trauma, with Lena and Milo as the actors, to see if he could force a different outcome, or perhaps to ensure the failure was repeated, to prove his grim worldview correct. The final piece fell into place when Lena, pretending to need supplies, accessed the main supply locker at the station. Taped to the underside of the shelf where the pediatric airway kits were stored was a folded, worn photograph. It was of a little girl with pigtails, smiling Emily Gable. Written on the back in precise letters, "Protocol failed. Will it fail again?" The aftermath and verification involves a frantic, unofficial stakeout. Lena called in a personal favor from the sheriff, a childhood friend, and shared her evidence. They could not arrest Silas for knowing her schedule or giving a child an inhaler, but the sheriff agreed to monitor. On a night when Lena was scheduled with Silas, the sheriff positioned an unmarked car near her house. The call that came in was for a pediatric respiratory distress at a campsite near the old Gable property. It was a clear trap. Lena, riding in the back to prepare equipment, heard Silas on the radio with dispatch, his voice still that soft, calm monotone. He suggested a specific, treacherous shortcut to shave minutes off their response time, a road known for washouts. The sheriff, listening on the scanner, heard it too and intervened over the radio, ordering them to take the standard route. Upon arrival at the empty, dark campsite, Silas finally broke. He turned to Lena in the cab, his pale eyes gleaming with the fervent, broken light. "You took the longer route. You wasted 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Why? The protocol is clear. fastest route possible. Lena stared at him, her voice steady with fury and fear. The protocol is to arrive safely. To be a medic, not a martyr. Silas simply smiled, a thin, cold stretch of his lips. My niece didn't have 2 minutes and 47 seconds. The official record shows Silas Gable was involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation based on the sheriff's report and Lena's testimony. No criminal charges were filed, but the internal investigation, referenced in declassified memos, uncovered disturbing findings. Silas's personal laptop contained meticulously detailed logs of every call he and Lena had run, with timers, heart rate simulations, and notes on Lena's decisions. He had also created complex models of Milo's asthma triggers based on weather data he'd collected. The final, unresolved detail is this: upon his commitment, all of Silas's personal effects were inventoried. His paramedic badge was missing. 6 months later, on the anniversary of Emily Gable's death, the Silverwood Ambulance Corps received a small, unmarked package. Inside was a single, polished pediatric laryngoscope blade, and a neatly printed note that read, "The variables have been recorded. The experiment continues." The second patient, Clara Jensen, was a 51-year-old veteran paramedic known for her unflappable demeanor and her near-photographic memory for medical protocols. She worked for the Hart County EMS, covering a string of rural towns connected by winding, wooded roads. Her partner, a capable young man named Pete, relied on her experience. The incident that began the unraveling was, on its surface, a tragic but straightforward call. A late-night collision on Route 17. A car versus a deer. The driver, a man in his 30s named Thomas Reed, was critically injured, pinned in the driver's seat. Extraction took 40 minutes. Clara worked tirelessly to stabilize him, administering fluids, managing his pain, keeping him conscious. They finally loaded him into the ambulance, a time-critical race to the trauma center, 40 minutes away. Thomas Reed died 3 minutes into the transport. Despite Clara's and Pete's efforts, his injuries were too severe. They pronounced him at 1:14 a.m. It was a hard loss, but part of the job. They followed procedure, notified dispatch, continued to the hospital to deliver the body to the coroner's authority. 2 days later, Clara was doing her mandatory equipment check. She opened the main exterior compartment on the ambulance's passenger side to restock trauma dressings. Inside, nestled between the spare oxygen tubing and a box of gloves, she found a wristwatch. A man's, stainless steel, with a cracked crystal, and a leather band stained dark with what looked like blood. It was still running. She didn't recognize it. She asked Pete if he'd ever seen it. He hadn't. A cold suspicion formed. She bagged the watch and, instead of turning it into lost and found, she took it home. That night, she cleaned the dried blood from the band. Engraved on the back, in fine script, were the initials T.A.R. Thomas Allen Reed. Logic fought with impossibility. The watch was not on Thomas Reed's body when they extracted him. She would have noted it during her assessment. It was not on him when they pronounced him. She had helped log his personal effects, which consisted of a wallet, a wedding ring, and a cell phone. The compartment she found it in was only accessible from the outside of the ambulance. It could not have fallen in during the chaos of the call. Someone had placed it there after Thomas Reed was dead. The buildup was a silent, ghastly puzzle. Clara began to audit the ambulance after every shift. A week later, following a call for an elderly woman with a hip fracture, she found a single, delicate pearl earring in the same exterior compartment. The patient had not been wearing earrings. The compartment had not been opened during the call. Clara started reviewing the call logs for the days she found the items, looking for a common thread. The only link was that both calls, Thomas Reed's fatal accident and the elderly woman's fall, had required lengthy extrications. Long scenes where the ambulance was parked, its crew focused entirely on the patient, its exterior unattended and unobserved. She began to watch. On her next lengthy call, a multi-vehicle pileup in fog, she instructed Pete to handle the patient while she managed logistics. From the periphery of the flashing lights, she watched their ambulance, parked at a distance. For over an hour, nothing. Then, In a brief moment when the sheriff's deputy had moved his cruiser, blocking her view, she saw a shadow detach from the tree line near the ambulance. It was a figure in dark clothing, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. It approached the passenger side exterior compartment, opened it, placed something inside, closed it, and melted back into the woods. All in less than 10 seconds. Clara gave chase, but the fog and the dense undergrowth swallowed the figure without a trace. The reveal came from forensics and a painful deduction. Clara, now convinced she was being targeted or involved in something macabre, went to the sheriff with her evidence and her story. The watch and the earring were tested. The blood on the watch matched Thomas Reed. The earring had a partial fingerprint on the post, a fingerprint that did not match Clara, Pete, or any of the EMS or fire personnel on scene that day. It was entered into the database. It got a hit. The print belonged to a man named Robert Halsey. Robert Halsey had no criminal record, but he had a history. He was the son of Eleanor Halsey, the elderly woman with the hip fracture. He had been her sole caregiver, and, as the sheriff's discreet investigation revealed, he had been under suspicion years prior when his previous charge, an aunt, had died under mysterious circumstances, leaving him a small inheritance. No charges were filed. Clara and a detective pieced it together. Robert Halsey was a death collector. He was attracted to scenes of tragedy and mortality. He would lurk at the periphery of accidents, particularly those involving lengthy EMS responses. He would take a small personal token from the scene or from the deceased if he could get close enough, and then plant it on the ambulance that carried the victim away. The ambulance, a rolling symbol of failed salvation, became his shrine, his confessional. The items were trophies, but also a twisted form of absolution, transferring the taint of death from himself to the vehicle that couldn't prevent it. He was documenting his proximity to the moment of passing. The aftermath and verification involved a sting operation. The sheriff's department set up a fake accident scene on a remote road, with the patient, a deputy pinned in a car, and Clara's ambulance as the responding unit. Hidden cameras covered the tree line. Robert Halsey appeared within 20 minutes, drawn like a moth to the flashing lights. He was observed taking a photograph of the victim through the windshield, then approaching the ambulance's exterior compartment. He was arrested as he placed a cheap, plastic locket inside. His home, searched with a warrant, was a museum of morbidity. He had boxes of items: a child's hair ribbon from a drowning call 5 years prior, a businessman's tie clip from a heart attack at a local hotel, the missing dentures from a nursing home resident who had passed in transit. Each was tagged with a date, a location, and the unit number of the ambulance that responded. The official record shows Halsey was charged with multiple counts of disturbing a scene, trespassing, and desecration. He was sentenced to psychiatric confinement, but the case file, in its closing notes, poses an unresolved and chilling question. During his interrogation, Halsey claimed he was not working alone. He said he was part of a loose network of individuals who communicated online, individuals who felt a similar attraction to the transition. He called them witnesses. He gave up one username, Second Patient. Investigators traced the account to a public library computer in another state. The last post from Second Patient, made the day after Halsey's arrest, reads, "The collection is compromised. Begin the dispersal. Remember, the true token is not an object, but the memory of the breath stopping. That, they can never take from us." No further arrests were made. And Clara Jensen, to this day, before opening any exterior compartment on her ambulance, always looks over her shoulder, into the tree line. The unending shift. Leo Vance was a 58-year-old paramedic nearing retirement, a man who had seen everything and preferred the quiet, predictable rhythm of the overnight shift in the sleepy agricultural town of Flatruck. His partner was a fresh-faced rookie named Chloe. For Leo, the job had become a comfortable routine: check the rig, drink bad station coffee, run a few calls, finish paperwork. The horror began not with the scream, but with the silence. On the night of October 3rd, their only call was a transfer of a stable patient from the tiny Flatruck clinic to the regional hospital 30 miles south. A simple taxi job. They dropped the patient at 4:20 a.m. On the return trip, cruising down the Arrow Strait County Highway under a blanket of stars, Leo felt a profound sense of peace. He pointed out a constellation to Chloe, then he glanced at the dashboard clock. It read 3:15 a.m. He blinked. That was impossible. They'd left the clinic at 3:10. The transfer had taken over an hour. They should be approaching 4:30. He checked his watch, a reliable Seiko he'd worn for 20 years. Its hands glowed in the dark. 3:15. Chloe's phone, when she pulled it from her pocket, also showed 3:15. A cold trickle of confusion ran down Leo's spine. Must be a glitch from the hospital's underground parking, Chloe offered, her voice unsure. Screwed with the signals, Leo grunted, unconvinced. They drove in silence back to the station, the clock never budging past 3:17. The buildup was a slow, grinding dislocation from time itself. Their next shift, 2 nights later, began normally. At 1:08 a.m., a call for an abdominal pain at a farmhouse. They treated the patient, a farmer with a nasty bout of gastritis, and cleared the scene by 1:45. As they pulled onto the main road, Leo checked the clock. 1:08 a.m. The digital timestamp on the electronic patient care report they had just filed also read 1:08. It was as if the hour they had just spent had been folded out of existence. Chloe grew frantic, checking and rechecking devices. Leo maintained a stoic calm, but his mind raced through possibilities. Mass hysteria, carbon monoxide poisoning in the cab. He demanded they return to the station for a diagnostic. The chief, annoyed, found nothing wrong with the ambulance's systems or the station's air quality. The calls continued, each one trapping them in a temporal loop. They would be dispatched, spend 30 minutes or 3 hours on a call, and upon leaving the scene, all clocks would have rolled back to the moment of dispatch. The world outside the ambulance continued. They could hear other radio traffic progressing normally, see the sun begin to lighten the eastern sky, but for Leo and Chloe, they were stuck in the perpetual night of their shift. They were accruing no overtime. Their logbooks showed only the initial dispatch times. To the outside world, according to dispatch records later verified, they were miraculously fast, clearing calls in under 2 minutes. The physical toll was real, however. They grew exhausted, hungry, disoriented. Coffee did nothing. They were living the same hours over and over, their bodies aging without the world acknowledging the passage of time. Leo's investigation turned inward, to the history of the ambulance itself. Medic 9. It was an older model, purchased used from a county 2 states over. He called the former service, pretending to be doing maintenance research. The fleet manager there became quiet when Leo gave the unit number. We sold that one after an incident, a bad one. Whole crew lost on a long distance transfer. Found the rig parked in a field, empty, tanks full, clock stopped. They never found the crew. We didn't want it back. The date of that incident was October 3rd, 5 years prior to the day. The reveal was not a sight, but a sound. On their 7th repeated night, dispatched to a false alarm at a grain elevator, Leo snapped. He pulled the ambulance over on a deserted farm road, killed the lights and the engine. "We're not moving until we break this," he told Chloe. They sat in total darkness and silence. For an hour, nothing. Then, faintly at first, they began to hear it. It was the sound of their own voices, filtered as if through a cheap radio speaker. It was a conversation they'd had 3 loops ago about Chloe's college plans. The voices echoed slightly, coming from nowhere and everywhere. Then another layer of sound superimposed. The sound of a struggle, a gasp, a final, desperate keying of a radio mic that produced only a dying squelch. These were the sounds, Leo realized, of the original crew's final moments. Medic 9 wasn't a vehicle. It was a recording, a ghost tape, and it was replaying its own final, fatal shift, trapping any new crew inside its loop, forcing them to act out the parts until they, too, reached the unrecorded conclusion. The aftermath and verification is a case study in the unexplainable. Leo, using his decades of instinct, did the only thing he could think to break a loop. He deviated from protocol completely. Instead of proceeding to the grain elevator, he drove the ambulance directly into the shallow, weed-choked irrigation pond at the old Miller farm, the site where the original crew was last seen alive. As the water rose to the dorsals, the electronic system shorted in a cascade of sparks. The dashboard clock spun wildly, then froze. When sheriff's divers retrieved the vehicle the next day, Leo and Chloe were found unconscious in the front seat, suffering from exposure and shock, but alive. The ambulance's data module, a black box of sorts, was recovered. Its internal log showed a single, continuous shift that had begun on October 3rd, 5 years prior, and had never ended. It contained hundreds of overlapping run reports, all for the same series of calls, with the crew names changing to the current assigned personnel. The official report cites a complex, mass psychogenic episode triggered by undiagnosed environmental factors for Leo and Chloe. Medic 9 was scrapped, but the declassified evidence includes the audio analysis of the ambulance's internal microphone. Buried beneath the layers of recorded loops, audio experts isolated a final clear phrase, spoken in a voice that matches neither Leo nor Chloe, nor the original lost crew. It is a calm, weary whisper that says, "Shift change denied. You stay until relieved." And to this day, paramedics working the overnight in Flatrick report that sometimes, on the scanner, they'll hear a faint, broken transmission of a familiar voice calling for backup on a county road that no longer exists. The voice is always identified as coming from a unit simply called Medic 0. The courtesy call. Hannah Wright was a 35-year-old 9-1-1 operator for the Consolidated Dispatch Center, serving the cluster of small towns around Blackstone Lake. She was renowned for her empathy and her ability to keep callers calm in the worst moments. The first call that broke her rhythm came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was from a man named Mr. All, reporting his wife had fallen in their garden. Hannah dispatched an ambulance, stayed on the line, talked him through simple first aid. The ambulance arrived, treated the patient, transported her. Standard. 2 hours later, Hannah's direct line rang. The caller ID showed it was from the hospital's administrative office. The man on the line had a smooth, professional baritone. "Operator Wright, this is Dr. Evans from Lakeview General. We're conducting follow-up courtesy calls for today's admissions. We just wanted to thank you for your excellent handling of the Alden call. Your calm guidance made a significant difference." He asked a few benign questions about the call timeline, thanked her again, and hung up. Hannah felt a warm glow of professional pride. It was a nice, if unusual, gesture. The inciting incident was the second call, 3 days later. A multi-car accident on the Lake Bridge. Hannah worked frantically, coordinating fire, EMS, and police. It was chaotic, but successful. Exactly 2 hours after the last unit cleared the scene, her direct line rang again. Caller ID Lakeview General. Operator Wright. Dr. Evans again. Another exemplary job on that bridge incident. The triage information you relayed allowed our trauma team to be ready for the critical patient. We appreciate your service. Again, a few specific questions about timestamps and patient conditions reported, then a polite goodbye. This time, the glow was dimmer, replaced by a nagging question. How did he know it was her? Calls were routed randomly to operators, and his questions, while polite, were oddly precise. The build-up was a series of these perfectly timed courtesy calls, always 2 hours after a major incident, always praising her, always probing for minute details. Hannah began to dread them. She started varying her answers, giving slightly incorrect times or omitting minor details. Dr. Evans would gently correct her. "Are you sure the chest pain was reported as left-sided? Our intake says it was described as central crushing." A chill settled in her bones. She contacted the hospital administration to verify Dr. Evans. The head of patient services confirmed they had a Dr. Simon Evans on staff in the cardiology department, but he was on a 3-month sabbatical in Europe. He had not made any such calls. Panicked, Hannah went to her supervisor with the record of the calls. The supervisor, reviewing the call logs, found something disturbing. The calls were not coming from the hospital's switchboard. They were routed through a series of digital relays, a VoIP ghost line that was untraceable with their basic tools. They involved the police. A tech unit traced the final hop to a physical location, a rented storage unit on the outskirts of town. When deputies served the warrant, they found not a man, but an elaborate setup, a computer running voice synthesis software, a bank of monitors streaming live public safety radio feeds, and most horrifying, a real-time feed of Hannah's own workstation, captured by a tiny, hidden camera in the smoke detector above her desk. The courtesy calls were a cover. Someone was auditing her performance in real time, studying her decisions under stress. The reveal was in the data found on the computer's hard drive. It contained logs of hundreds of 9-1-1 calls over the past 6 months, not just from Hannah, but from 3 other operators in neighboring counties. Each log was annotated with evaluations: response time, good; triage accuracy, poor; emotional control, excellent. It was a training program. But for what? The answer was in a separate, encrypted directory. With the help of state cybercrimes investigators, it was cracked. Inside were profiles, not of operators, but of specific types of emergencies. Protocol for mass casualty, bridge collapse; protocol for isolated cardiac event, rural residents; and for each protocol, a ranked list of preferred 9-1-1 operators, with Hannah consistently at the top. The system wasn't just evaluating, it was selecting. It was identifying the most competent, most calm dispatcher for a given type of crisis. And then, via the courtesy call, extracting the precise operational details post-event to refine its models. The entity behind it was preparing for specific disasters, and it was using real human emergencies as its live fire exercises. The aftermath and verification led to a dead end draped in official silence. The storage unit was rented under a stolen identity. The equipment was high-end, but bore no serial numbers. The FBI took over, classifying it as a potential domestic terrorism intelligence gathering operation. Hannah was placed on administrative leave for her own safety. The official statement to the dispatch center cited a stalker with a public safety fetish, and the case was quietly closed. But the declassified summary from the Joint Terrorism Task Force, heavily redacted, concludes with the disturbing hypothesis. The sophistication of the software suggested state-level capability. The chosen scenarios: bridge collapse, chemical spill at a specific fertilizer plant, a fire at the senior home, all correlated with identified vulnerabilities in the county's emergency response plan. The system wasn't just learning, it was stress testing the county's weakest points. The unresolved detail haunts Hannah every time she hears a siren. 6 months after the investigation went cold, she received a formal-looking letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper. It was a performance review. At the top was her name. Categories like crisis logic, voice command, and resource allocation were graded on a scale from 1 to 10. She scored mostly 9 seconds and 10 seconds. At the bottom, under overall evaluation, was typed, "Operator Wright demonstrates exceptional aptitude under authentic stress conditions. She is hereby added to the primary response roster for Tier 1 incident management." It was signed with a digital signature she couldn't decipher. Every year, on the anniversary of the bridge incident, she receives an updated review in the mail. Her scores keep improving. The donor cycle. Ben Sawyer was a 47-year-old organ transplant coordinator, a man who worked in the profound space between death and life. He was based at St. Luke's Hospital in the quiet college town of Crestwood, but his territory covered 3 rural counties. His job was to be the calm, logistical brain during the storm of tragedy, matching viable organs from deceased donors with recipients on the National Registry. He believed in the sacred geometry of his work, where one heartbreak could alleviate another. The first crack in that faith appeared as a statistical anomaly. Crestwood and its surrounding counties had, over the past 18 months, developed a donor rate for certain tissues: corneas, heart valves, skin that was 300% above the national average for a population of its size and demographic. It was a positive blip, celebrated internally as a testament to effective community outreach. But Ben, who lived in the spreadsheets, noticed something else. These donations weren't coming from the usual sources: the car accidents on the highway, the strokes in the elderly. They were coming from a specific pattern of calls: late night, single vehicle accidents on remote wooded roads, where the victim was pronounced dead at the scene by EMS, and then transported directly to STT. Looks for potential donor screening. The timing was always between a M and a M. The responding ambulance was always the same: a private, non-hospital service called Palisade Medical Transport. The inciting incident was a name. Ben was reviewing a chart for a recent donor, John Doe, from a crash on Ridgeway Pike. The man had no ID, no next of kin located, but was a perfect tissue match for 3 recipients. Standard procedure. But as Ben scanned the EMS run sheet attached, the paramedic's signature caught his eye. M. Vance. It was a neat, looping script. He'd seen it before. He pulled the last 5 Palisade donor cases, all signed by M. Vance. He pulled up the state paramedic registry. There was no M. Vance currently licensed. He called Palisade's office. The manager, sounding harried, said they had a Mike Vance on contract, but he was on leave. Ben asked for his license number for the file. The manager promised to call back. He never did. The buildup was a descent into a hidden system. Ben began to track the Palisade ambulance, cross-referencing its dispatch logs obtained through a contact at County 911 with the hospital's donor intake. The correlation was perfect. Every time Palisade transported a pronouncement from one of those specific backroads, a donor process was initiated. The donors were always alone, always without immediate family, always a match for at least one high-priority recipient on the list. It was as if the accidents were being curated for their medical utility. Driven by a growing dread, Ben took a personal day and followed the Palisade ambulance one night, keeping a long distance on the dark roads. He saw it parked, lights off, near a known deer crossing area on a treacherous curve. He watched from a dirt pull-off, binoculars trained on the vehicle. For an hour, nothing. Then, just after a M, a single set of headlights appeared, rounding the curve at a moderate speed. As it passed the ambulance's hiding spot, the Palisade unit flicked on its grille lights, not the full sirens, just the silent, sudden flash of blue and white. The oncoming car, startled, swerved violently, left the pavement, and slammed into a thick stand of pine trees. Ben's blood turned to ice. He fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 himself, as he watched the 2 Palisade paramedics, calm and methodical, emerge from their unit and approach the wreck. They weren't rushing. By the time county EMS and sheriff deputies arrived 20 minutes later, the victim had been extracted, declared deceased, and was already loaded into the Palisade ambulance. The lead deputy's report, which Ben later accessed, noted the Palisade crew's remarkable efficiency and listed the cause as driver likely distracted by animal, overcorrected. Ben knew the truth. The ambulance hadn't been waiting to respond. It had been waiting to cause. The reveal was in the financial trails and the cold biology. Ben took his evidence to a state investigator friend. A covert investigation was launched. It revealed that Palisade Medical Transport was a shell company owned by a holding group that also had a controlling interest in a for-profit tissue bank and a biotech firm specializing in organ preservation technology. The donors were not random accidents of fate. They were targets. The system identified individuals with rare blood types or tissue markers who were listed as organ donors on their licenses, lived alone, and habitually drove isolated roads late at night. Then, Palisade would create the opportunity. A sudden flash of lights on a dark curve was often all it took. The paramedics, M. Vance and his partner, were not medical professionals. They were former combat medics with dishonorable discharges, skilled at trauma, and utterly devoid of ethics. They would pronounce the victim, begin preservation protocols on scene, and deliver a pristine donor to the hospital, where the legitimate, well-meaning transplant team would complete the process, unaware of the crime that had seeded it. The aftermath and verification is a story of justice with a hollow core. The state investigation culminated in a raid, arresting the Palisade crew and the corporate executives. The court cases were long and complex, resulting in multiple life sentences for murder under the felony murder rule. The official record hails it as a victory against medical predation, but the declassified audit of the tissue bank's inventory, attached to the sentencing memorandum, reveals the true horror. Of the 47 donors linked to Palisade, the organs and tissues harvested were used in over 200 successful transplants. Recipients included a 6-year-old girl who received a corneal graft, a firefighter who received a skin graft for burn repairs, and a young mother who received a life-saving heart valve. The families of the victims were told their loved ones had died in tragic accidents, but had given the gift of life. They were given medals from the donor network. The unresolved, chilling detail is this: the court could not legally force the notification of the recipients. They lived their lives, seeing through a dead man's eyes, their burns healed with a murdered woman's skin, their hearts beating with tissue taken from a life extinguished for profit. They have no idea their second chance was bought with someone else's first. And Ben Sawyer, who still coordinates transplants, now has a recurring nightmare. He sees a spreadsheet where every recipient's name is highlighted in green, and every donor's name in red, and at the bottom, in the cell marked net life gain, the total is always inexorably a positive number. The final vector. Dr. Arise Thorne was a 62-year-old epidemiologist for the state health department, a man who thought in terms of populations, vectors, and are not values. When a strange, localized cluster of a rare fungal pneumonia appeared in the remote river town of Ferry's End, he was dispatched not as a doctor, but as a detective of disease. The victims were all patients who had been transported by the townie's sole ambulance service in the previous month. The initial assumption was an environmental mold in the ambulance itself, but the cultures told a stranger story. The fungal strain, Aspergillus sanguis, was not native to the region. It was a variant previously documented only in a few tropical biolabs. Its method of transmission was not airborne in the usual sense. It required direct introduction into deep lung tissue. The inciting incident was a timeline. Arise mapped the onset of each patient's symptoms against their ambulance transport records. The pattern was not random. Every victim had been intubated, had a breathing tube placed during their transport by a specific paramedic. His name was Eli Vance. Reviewing the run sheets, Arise saw that Vance had documented difficulty securing airway or required rapid sequence intubation on each of these calls, where other paramedics on other calls for similar conditions had not. The intubations were, on paper, medically justified, but the correlation was statistically impossible. Arise requested a review of Vance's certification and continuing education. His file was impeccable. He had even taken a specialized course in advanced airway management 6 months prior, sponsored by a shadowy private foundation called the Hippocrates Group. The buildup was a medical mystery veering into malice. Arise, with the authority of the state, impounded the ambulance and had it forensically dismantled. No fungal reservoirs were found. He then observed Vance, under the guise of a routine quality assurance ride-along. Vance was in his late 20s, intense, preternaturally calm. His technique was flawless, his knowledge encyclopedic. But Arise noticed something. Vance's personal medical kit was custom, larger than standard issue. During a call for a severe asthmatic, Arise watched as Vance prepared to intubate. His movements were smooth, but as he selected the endotracheal tube from his own kit, Arise saw a faint, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist over the end of the tube before he inserted it. It was the kind of motion one makes to flick away a bit of lint, or to coat something with a powder. Arise secured the tube after the procedure, on the pretext of needing it for equipment audit. In his mobile lab, he swabbed it. The culture that grew was not Aspergillus sanguis. It was something else. A genetically modified bacteriophage, a virus designed to target specific bacterial strains. This wasn't infection. This was inoculation. Vance wasn't making people sick by accident. He was deliberately introducing pathogens and their countermeasures into his patient's lungs. The reveal required accessing the encrypted files on Vance's personal laptop, seized during a simultaneous raid on his apartment. Arise, working with cyber investigators, decoded the data. It was not the work of a serial killer. It was the work of a field researcher. Vance was a contractor for the Hippocrates Group, a rogue biotech firm operating in the gray market of human trials. Their business was developing ultra-rapid vaccines and targeted antimicrobial therapies. Their methodology was monstrous. They would identify a community, introduce a tailored, treatable pathogen like the fungal pneumonia, and simultaneously administer their experimental cure via a different vector, the bacteriophage on the tube. The ambulance was the perfect delivery system. It reached people in crisis, bypassed normal consent, and provided immediate, trackable results. The patients of Fairy's End were unwitting, living petri dishes. Their survival rates versus complication rates were the data points. Eli Vance wasn't a paramedic. He was a principal investigator. The aftermath and verification is a labyrinth of legal and ethical fallout. Vance was arrested on charges of assault, practicing medicine without valid research consent, and bioterrorism. The Hippocrates Group vanished, its servers wiped. The official health department report, however, concluded with a staggering admission. Analysis of the bacteriophage and the fungal strain showed a sophisticated understanding of immunology. In every case Vance treated, the experimental therapy worked. The patients recovered from the fungal pneumonia faster and with fewer complications than any standard treatment would have predicted. The science was breakthrough. The method was unconscionable. The unresolved detail is contained in the final addendum to the FBI's investigation, marked for internal analysis only. Before his arrest, Vance had filed over 24 detailed case reports to a dead drop server. These reports weren't just about Fairy's End. They referenced prior study populations in 2 other small towns in different states, each with their own unusual, short-lived disease clusters that had baffled local health officials. The conclusion of the addendum reads, Subject Vance viewed his actions as triage on a species level. He believed the ends of medical progress justified any means, provided the study cohort was statistically insignificant and geographically isolated. He remains convinced others will continue his work, and once a year, the health department's National Notifiable Disease Database pings with a single, anomalous case of a rare pathogen, always in a small town, always in a patient who had recent ambulance contact. The case is always resolved before an investigator can arrive. The pathogen is always one step ahead of the mainstream medical literature. It is, according to the dry epidemiological notes, as if the disease is being quietly, perfectly, cured before it can ever become an epidemic. The house on Flatrick Road. Sarah Jennings was a 29-year-old critical care paramedic, a job that had hardened her to most horrors, but had also instilled in her a deep, unwavering trust in protocol. She worked for Metro Ambulance, but lived in the quiet, unincorporated community of Mills Crossing, a place of sprawling properties and thick pine forests. Her neighbor, 2 parcels down, was an elderly man named Arthur Weller. He was a widower, a retired engineer, known for being fiercely private, but always polite when they passed on the road. Sarah's only concern was his isolation. So, when she began to notice the ambulance, a stark white, unmarked van with a simple red cross on the side parked in his driveway every Thursday evening, she assumed it was a medical transport service. Arthur had his ailments. It made sense. The inciting incident was a Thursday in November. Sarah was returning from a grueling double shift just after sunset. As she passed Arthur's property, the white ambulance was there, its rear doors open. A single paramedic, a woman with a severe blonde ponytail, was loading a large, heavy-duty plastic crate from the house into the back. Something about the crate snagged Sarah's professional attention. It was the wrong color and shape for medical equipment. It was a bright, industrial yellow, the kind used for construction or hazardous materials. And the way the paramedic carried it with a strained, careful heft, not the efficient slide of medical gear, felt wrong. Sarah slowed her car, offering a wave. The paramedic saw her, froze for a fraction of a second, then gave a curt, unsmiling nod before slamming the doors shut. The ambulance left quickly, kicking up gravel. Sarah drove home, the image of that yellow crate lingering. The buildup was a slow accumulation of dissonant details. The following Thursday, Sarah made a point of being home. From an upstairs window with a view of Arthur's driveway, she watched through binoculars. The ambulance arrived at p.m. sharp. The same paramedic, accompanied by a tall, broad-shouldered male partner, went inside. They emerged 45 minutes later, again carrying a yellow crate. This time, Sarah saw a label on the side. Even at a distance, she recognized the universal trefoil symbol for radioactive material. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. No home medical treatment involved radioactive material in crates. None. Her investigation began cautiously. She ran the ambulance's license plate from memory through a law enforcement database she had access to for work. It came back as registered to Aegis Biologistics, a company with a P.O. box in another state, and no other information. She called Arthur, under the guise of checking on him after seeing some commotion at his place. His voice was frail but sharp. "Just my weekly therapy, Sarah. Very helpful people. Don't you worry about me." He sounded sincere, but also rehearsed. She drove to the county records office, looking up Arthur Weller's property history. The land had been in his family for generations, but a footnote in a zoning variance from the 1970s caught her eye. Arthur had petitioned to build a private geological survey annex on the property, citing his work as a consulting engineer for the state. The annex was approved. Satellite images showed a small, windowless concrete structure 100 yards behind the main house, nearly invisible under tree cover. Sarah's professional paranoia shifted into high gear. The next Thursday, she called in sick. As dusk fell, she dressed in dark clothing, took a handheld radio scanner tuned to public safety bands, and slipped into the woods bordering Arthur's property. She found a vantage point overlooking both the house and the concrete annex. The ambulance arrived. The two paramedics went directly to the annex, not the house. They used a keypad on the door. Sarah listened on the scanner. There was no radio traffic from their vehicle, but her scanner, set to sweep, picked up a very low power, encrypted transmission on a UHF frequency used by some private security firms. It was a data burst, not voice. Then, the annex door opened, spilling a peculiar, actinic blue-white light onto the ground. The two figures emerged, struggling with a new yellow crate. This one had a clear biohazard symbol next to the radioactive trefoil. As they loaded it, the male paramedic's jacket rode up, revealing a holstered pistol on his hip. Paramedics do not carry firearms. The reveal came from a combination of trespass and Arthur's final, desperate confession. After the ambulance left, Sarah approached the annex. The keypad was a recent model, but Arthur, perhaps sensing a kindred, concerned soul, perhaps simply tired of his decades-long burden, was waiting for her at the back door of his house. He looked ancient and terrified. "You're a medical person," he whispered, pulling her inside. "You'll understand." In his dusty study, he showed her schematics. He hadn't been a simple engineer. He was a radiologist and a physicist who had worked on Cold War-era projects. The annex wasn't a survey office. It was a clandestine, privately run disposal and containment site for orphaned radioactive medical isotopes and biowaste from defunct hospitals and research labs across the state. It was illegal, horrifically unsafe. But in his twisted logic, he was keeping it safe from less careful handlers. Aegis Biologistics was a black market waste removal service. They weren't paramedics. They were hazardous materials contractors, using an ambulance as the perfect cover of vehicle that could transport dangerous materials without suspicion, under the guise of medical necessity. They were paying Arthur a pittance to store the worst of it in his backyard bunker, and now, they were cleaning him out because the operation was getting too hot. The aftermath and verification erupted into a multi-agency environmental disaster. Sarah called the state police and the EPA, the local sheriff. A raid the next day found the annex containing enough improperly stored cesium-137, strontium-90, and assorted pathogenic waste to contaminate the county's groundwater for a century. Arthur Weller was taken into protective custody, his mind fractured by guilt and radiation exposure. The ambulance was intercepted on the highway 2 states over. The 2 fake paramedics were arrested. They were carrying enough weapons and fake credentials to suggest connections to a larger organized crime ring specializing in illegal waste disposal. The official case file is a foot-thick stack of environmental violation notices, criminal indictments, and a massive, ongoing EPA Superfund cleanup. But the unresolved detail, the one that chills Sarah Jennings to her core, is in the evidence log from the ambulance. Along with the crates of waste, investigators found several sets of genuine, stolen paramedic uniforms, complete with legitimate-looking IDs from various services. They also found a detailed, laminated map of the tri-state area. On it were marked over 24 other small, remote properties like Arthur's, each with a handwritten note of what was stored there: chemotherapeutic, low-grade plutonium, prion contaminated. A task force has been working through the list for years. Some sites are empty, some are toxic time bombs. And according to a footnote in the most recent interagency memo, the fake paramedics, in exchange for reduced sentences, provided a single, chilling piece of information. They were not the collectors. They were just the drivers. The person who hired them, the one who provided the maps and the schedules, was referred to only as the doctor. And the doctor always gave instructions via voice-scrambled phone call that originated from a different rural payphone each time. The last known instruction, given the week after the raid, was reportedly accelerate the collections. The sick are everywhere. 11 stories. 11 fractures in the bedrock of trust we place in the flashing lights and the sterile uniforms. From the predatory opportunism of the donor cycle to the cold, clinical experimentation of the final vector, a pattern emerges verified not by rumor, but by evidence. These are not tales of supernatural monsters or ancient curses. The horror documented here is human, systemic, and methodical. It exploits the very framework designed for our protection. It uses the ambulance as a hunting ground, a laboratory, a hearse, and a disguise. It targets the vulnerable, the isolated, and the trusting. According to internal affairs reports, declassified court transcripts, and victim impact statements, the common thread is the weaponization of a sacred duty. The paramedic, who is a collector. The dispatcher, who is an unwitting subject of evaluation. The ambulance that is a tomb, or a time loop, or a vector for unspeakable experiments. Each case file we have examined tonight confirms a disturbing truth. The most dangerous threats are often those that arrive with sirens, offering help. These verified accounts from small towns, places where everyone knows your name, reveal a profound and unsettling paradox. In the close-knit community, trust is a given. But that very trust becomes the weakness that predators in white uniforms seek to exploit. The silence of the woods, the emptiness of the back road, the loneliness of the elderly. These are not just settings. They are conditions that allow these nightmares to thrive, unchecked, until a single observant individual dares to question the official story. We began by asking what happens when the first face you see in an emergency is the last face you ever want to see. The evidence now provides the answer. It is a reality where your medical history can make you a target, where a routine transport can become a one-way trip into a statistical anomaly, where the phrase, "We ray here to help," can be the most terrifying lie you will ever hear. This is the purpose of Verified Nightmare: to document, to verify, to arm you with awareness, because awareness is the first and most vital form of self-defense. Trust your instincts. If something about a response feels off, if the details don't align, if the questions are too specific, if the vehicle isn't right, do not dismiss that feeling. According to survival psychology studies, that gut-level unease is your brain recognizing a pattern that doesn't fit. Listen to it. Ask for secondary verification. Call 911 back to confirm the unit. Your caution is not paranoia. In the world these stories illustrate, it is prudence. Subscribe to Verified Nightmare. In a landscape where these events are not fiction, but documented reality, staying informed is not about entertainment. It is about education. Hit that notification bell. We are your source for the verified truth, no matter how dark it gets. Like this video. By doing so, you help the algorithm guide other truth seekers to this channel. You help build a community of the aware, the vigilant, and the prepared. Comment below with your own accounts. We have a dedicated team that investigates every plausible story submitted. Your experience could be the crucial data point that prevents another tragedy. We have navigated the darkest corners of trust. Tonight, remember the lessons etched in these case files. The most dangerous monsters are not the ones in the shadows. They are the ones who arrive in the light, wearing a uniform, and speaking in calm, clinical tones. This has been Verified Nightmare. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and always verify.